All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and a good evening to our listeners in the various corners of the world. My name is Silva Kachikian, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the Armenian International Women's Association virtual program. This is the second of a three-part series in collaboration with the YWCA of Glendale, Pasadena cities in California. We are discussing violence in our communities and in families, and how we can create a culture of prevention, which may seem quite ironic today because the world is currently in turmoil, witnessing the horrific acts of violence and aggression, as we are now seeing in the Ukraine and as we are continuing to see in Artsakh and Armenia. And all of this is under the guise of war, resulting in significant numbers of deaths. However, violent deaths cannot simply be attributed to war. According to the report by the World Health Organization, more than 70% of violent deaths occur outside of armed conflicts. It's an incredible number. Violence is the intentional use of physical, emotional, psychological, sexual, financial, verbal force and power against another person or against a group or a community, resulting in injury, death, psychological harm, maldevelopment, and or deprivation. It occurs worldwide, irrespective of culture. And although the victims can be of any gender, race, age, or sexual orientation, the most frequent are women, children, and the elderly. So today, we continue our discussion to understand and actively seek prevention of violence in our communities and families, with the involvement of men who break the culture and social norms by courageously sharing their perspective and passion for advocacy against violence. Today's moderator is Judy Norsigian, and Judy is an author, a co-founder of Our Bodies, Ourselves, and chairs the board of the same organization. She has co-authored 8 or 9 of the Simon & Schuster editions of the book Our Bodies, Ourselves, which has been translated into, if I'm not mistaken, 29 languages and serving over 4 million copies, which are sold. She has appeared on countless television and radio programs, including the NBC Nightly News, Al Jazeera, Oprah, Fox News, among so many others, and she has served on various boards of organizations, one of which is the National Women's Health Network. She's received recognition from academic institutions and holds honorary doctorates from Boston University and Simmons University. And before I pass the platform on to Judy, I want to give you all a quick reminder that this event is being recorded and it will be made available on the AWA website and the YouTube platform. You will have the opportunity to ask questions and contribute to the discussion toward the end. So just please raise your hand for attention or use the chat. So Judy, welcome. The platform is yours.
Thank you so much, Silva, and thank you for your leadership at AWA. It has been so invaluable and much appreciated. I also want to remind people that if you do not see your name at the bottom of your screen, you might need to enter it. There's a glitch somehow, and not everybody's name is appearing, even though you registered. So as is the case in so many communities across the globe, as Silva just pointed out, domestic violence is a challenging problem in the Armenian community as well. And AWA has been long interested in helping to develop creative responses, and we began supporting the Women's Support Center in Yerevan around the time it was established in 2010, about 12 years ago. And on 4 different trips to Armenia during the past decade, my partner, Craig Norberg Boehm, who is a speaker and facilitator today, and I met with students at the AUA, the American University of Armenia, as well as community groups in Armenia to help advance conversations that would engage more men in the activities focused on preventing violence. For example, how do we raise our Armenian boys to become sensitive, respectful, empathic adults? How do we raise them to think about all the issues around equality and equity that are so important in creating healthy communities? Now, our goal with these 3 sessions has been to see if we couldn't corral or entice or somehow engage a smaller group of Armenian men who would consider a project to go forward in the Armenian community, whether it be virtual, certainly had to be, we started this out thinking about COVID, or something that could be small and more targeted to a local community. And that's partly what we're doing here with these 3 sessions sponsored by AWA, and we're now in the middle, starting the second. We're going to begin today with presentations by Ariana Chavez and Hazmik Borushian, who are both on staff at the Glendale YWCA and obviously serve the large Armenian community there. They've done some amazing work, and I will briefly introduce them, and then they will begin to give us a small presentation that will get us going today. And then we're going to go on where my partner will moderate a conversation among some Armenian men who will be responding to the remarks that they hear before them. So Ariana graduated from the University of California in Riverside, got her master's in Chicano Studies at California State University in Northridge. She joined the Glendale Y in 2014 and is currently directing the Domestic Violence Services Program there. A passionate advocate and really focused on prevention in the ways that we need to be. Hazmik is a young woman who's in the not-for-profit sector and has done a lot of things in the Armenian community in particular. She has brought consciousness to domestic violence and shared her knowledge on how to prevent gender-based violence from providing certified training to agencies that are interested in working with survivors and victims of domestic violence to educating local youth about dating abuse prevention. And she's certainly part of this growing network to prevent domestic violence. She's done so many other things in the Armenian community. You can read more about Ariana and Hazmik at the website where we have longer bios for them. So with this, I'm going to pass it on to both you, Ariana, and Hazmik to introduce these issues as you see them, particularly from your base in Glendale.
Great, thank you so much. My name is Ariana. I am the Domestic Violence Services Manager for YWCA Glendale and Pasadena. We are going to have a short presentation on what is domestic violence, the complexities of domestic violence, and how we can do some type of prevention work before we start with the panelists. Hazmik, if you
do you mind if I share my screen?
Presentation.
Okay, awesome.
Please. Okay, great. So today we'll be talking about domestic violence and prevention engagement. Next slide, please. So domestic violence is a range of behavior used to establish power and exert control. At YWCA Glendale and Pasadena, we use the power and control wheel. In this short condensed version of the power and control wheel, we talk about using intimidation. So the abuser is using intimidation, using emotional abuse, using isolation, minimizing, denying that there is any type of abuse, sometimes using children as leverage to continue further acts of abuse, using gender privilege, using economic abuse, and using coercion and threats. All of these are used to exert the power and maintain the control within the relationship. And if we go into the next slide, we will talk more about what are other forms of abuse. So we have physical abuse. It could be as simply as pushing, verbal abuse, demeaning them. It goes with emotional abuse as well, psychological abuse. So here we could talk about gaslighting, where survivors could think that I am the problem, it's me, I'm the one that's causing this abuse. legal abuse. So it could be using the court system, specifically with the children, going to family law court and changing visitation schedules, sexual abuse, not coercing them into sexual activities and them not wanting to, economic abuse. We have many survivors who didn't have a job, weren't allowed to work. If they did work, it would be where all the income would go into the abuser. And spiritual abuse, meaning that they're not allowed to go to church or practice their own religious beliefs. And the reason is, it's because it's also to that control. What if the survivor goes to their church, their parish, and discloses the abuse? Then it's where everyone might know that this person who is the abuser is doing X, Y, and Z. Next slide, please. Additionally, what we talk about specifically with all our participants, whoever comes into our building, we talk about the cycle of violence. So this is a cycle of violence. So we could start in the tension building phase, which is on the top. So usually this is when the abuser starts to get angry, with minor incidents of abuse begin. Communication breaks down, and the victim or survivor feels like they need to keep the abuser calm. This is when they feel like they're walking on eggshells, that everything they do is wrong. Eventually, the tension becomes too much. Then we go to abuse occurs. So this could be an episode of physical, sexual, verbal, emotional abuse. Then where we go into, it's the makeup phase. So the abuser apologizes, promises that the abuse won't happen again, but blames the victim for provoking the abuse. During this phase, the abuser will offer gifts and make promises. So we call this the honeymoon phase. Then we have the calm phase, where the abuser acts like the abuse never happened. There's no abuse taking place. Some of the promises were made, so it could be where he or she is taking anger management classes, they're going to therapy. So this gives the victim / survivor hope that the abuse is over and that they are going to change. But then we start again with the tension building phase, where the abuser gets angry for minor incidents. The victim / survivor feels like they're walking on eggshells, and it starts all over again. This cycle could happen within a day, within weeks, within months, years. We've had survivors who took back their abusers and believed that they changed. They did things that gave them hope, but then the abuse started all over again. Next slide, please. So why do people stay? At YWCA Glendale and Pasadena, we have this approach to think outside of the box and not let survivors know, why couldn't you just leave? Because it's not that simple. It's, why do people stay? There are many reasons why they stay. It could be family, it could be financials, we might not know. Because on average, it takes about 7 to 10 times for a survivor to permanently leave their abusive relationship. We've had survivors who come into the building and say, I've done this so many times, I don't know why I go back. We've had even survivors who go into our emergency shelter who tell us they tried to leave, but they just go back. Next slide, please. One reason also could be why they go back is because exiting the relationship is the most unsafe time for a survivor. As the abuser senses they're losing power, they will often act in dangerous ways to regain control. Every single time when a survivor is planning on leaving their abusive relationship, we safety plan with them. We do everything we can to help them as much as we can, and our safety is possible. A safety plan is a personalized, practical plan that includes ways to remain safe while in a relationship. It could mean, who can you call if there's a crisis? Where can you go? Safety strategies when you're in danger, how to stay safe in different environments, such as home, work, or during custody exchanges. Every single time a person comes into our building or calls our hotline, we ask, are you safe? If they feel that they're not safe, we safety plan with them. We let them know, okay, if you need to leave your home as quickly as possible, how can you do so? Where can you go where you could be safe? Next slide, please. So how can you support a victim or survivor? Express your concerns. Listen non-judgmentally. You could be the first person that they disclose this information to. And if you react a certain way, it could be where survivors will never let another person know and will stay in the abusive relationship. Assure them that violence is not their fault. Give them resources and support. Here is the National DV hotline, which is 1-800-799-7233. Additionally, if you all are in the Southern California area and specifically in the Glendale area, our DV hotline is 888-999-7511 and safety plan with them. Mainly asking, how can you leave your home safely? If you need to leave quickly, where can you go? Who can you call? Next slide, please. And now, Hasmik.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the transition, Ariana. Hi, everybody. My name is Hasmik Burushian. I'm YWCA Glendale and Pasadena's Domestic Violence Outreach and Education Coordinator. Now we're going to be talking about setting the tone, the foundation for today's conversation, moving towards a world that is free from domestic violence. So basically, what is our responsibility as community members? So how can our communities push us towards a reality where domestic violence is no longer harming us? What is our duty? Let's talk about it. So one route to the perpetuation of domestic violence is toxic masculinity, right? So we are taught that men need to fit within these certain borders, if they are borders, right? When it comes to identifying. So men, quote unquote, are taught to be tough, dominant, non-emotional, independent. You can't express yourself. You need to be on your best behavior. You need to always be the tough guy. These are the rules that the system has placed on men. And it hurts all of us, right? It hurts men, it hurts women, it hurts all genders. Roots of toxic masculinity. So dismissal of emotional expression. Again, I feel like at a very young age, this is very embedded in the culture, right? Especially in the Armenian culture. We're taught that you're not supposed to cry. I know even when I go to family functions, when I have a younger cousin in the family, if they're crying, immediately I hear the mother, don't cry, don't cry. And we should move away from that. No acknowledgement of needs for mental health. Again, it's such a taboo topic in our community and in a lot of communities. Hyper pursuit of physical, sexual, and intellectual dominance. Basically, you need to be the dominant person in almost every realm, right, as a man. Patriarchal system, condemning any presence of femininity. So again, if men are showing any expression of what is considered to be feminine, a lot of people in society and the communities are considering them queer, and we start hearing homophobic sentiments, right? And then another root of toxic masculinity is being fixated in this binary system. You're either this or you're either that. You're either feminine or masculine, when we need to move away from that. We need to move away from these borders. So how can we promote healthy masculinity? And we all define on our own what is considered healthy. But one thing is addressing disrespect by calling people in and out. So it could even be when folks are in their friend group and maybe a friend has made a very problematic comment. Call them out or call them in. Allowing men to express a wide range of emotions. Again, welcoming feelings, especially since it's not in the typical practice because of toxic masculinity. Encouraging men to demonstrate nurturing, compassion, and caring behavior towards themselves and others. Something that's not considered manly, right? Being the nurturer or being compassionate, having love towards your friends, even platonically. We need to welcome those. Creating openings for men to share their experiences and feelings, especially if you sense there's a problem. I know I can't speak for men, but I also know that it's very common in our community, in the Armenian community, and in a lot of other communities, that men don't really have spaces to share and be open intimately about their feelings. If you see a man hurting, check in with them. It's okay to show up for your other friend, right? If your man asks for help when you're struggling, again, I feel like we live in this sort of culture where we need to do everything on our own. We can't count on our community. We can't count on our loved ones. And we need to move away from that as well. Let's talk about how we can mobilize our communities towards a world that is safe from domestic violence prevention. Mobilizing our communities to, one, reject gender norms. We need to stop normalizing traditional gender roles, right? We need to have an equitable gender culture, right? A man can cook, a man can clean, the woman could cook and clean. It's about equity. On learning toxic masculinity, as mentioned, one way to reject gender norms is by rejecting toxic masculinity and shifting our responses to violence. Again, I feel like in daily culture, there's like forms of violence that we don't even address. It could be calling another woman a whore or a slut, and a lot of people in that community space may be normalizing it by giggling at it or not calling it out. And by addressing those simple things, we could start addressing greater things. Sharing knowledge on the composition of healthy dating behavior. So learning about the red flags of toxic traits within a relationship, and that could be platonic or romantic. And this is very important to teach to ourselves, to our young people in our communities, because unfortunately, this knowledge is not found within the classroom. So we need to take it upon ourselves to take that responsibility and share this knowledge, because by learning this knowledge, we're also moving away from domestic violence. We're addressing the early signs of what could lead to a toxic relationship. Acknowledging and stressing healthy signs within a relationship. Whenever we see a healthy behavior, it's okay to acknowledge, to celebrate, to honor it, and to mark it. Navigating conflict within relationships. So again, teaching people how to address conflict within a relationship, because yes, it happens. It's okay to have conflict in a relationship, but of course there's a mindful and safe way to address it between the two people or how many people are in that relationship. And that brings us towards the end of our talk. I know it was very brief, but we are here throughout the dialogue to stay here. And if you have questions about our services here at YWCA Glendale and Pasadena, or in the work that we do, we're always here to support with answers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ariana and Hasmik. And I want to say that if you have any questions or comments, you can put them in the chat. You can also raise your hands and we may be able to see you. There aren't that many of us today. And the other thing I will note is that Ariana has to leave for another engagement in about 15, 20 minutes. So when she disappears, don't be alarmed. Hasmik will be staying with us. And they are an incredible resource for the community there in Glendale, but also for all of us concerned about this problem elsewhere as well. So if I could see any hands going up, I'll recognize you. Remember, your names are not automatically on the screen because of a glitch we haven't resolved, although I see that some of you have put in your names. If you would put in your name, it would help us recognize you more readily. And if you raise your hand, if you're on screen, we can call on you to ask your question or make your comment. If I don't hear any comments, Judith, did you have your hand up? I was just, no, okay. So I guess
I think Manu has his hand up.
Manu, okay, I missed you because you're one of the speakers. I was looking at all the participants.
Both wonderful presentations. And before you leave, Hasmik, when you covered all the things that you do in your program, one of our people behind the scenes is Kendra Bogosian Marasco, who teaches this at Providence College. But I turned to her many, many years ago when we had trouble with a relative in my family. And one of the things she laid out is that a lot of victims come from a place that they had no power. And is it a cardinal rule when you work with people that's always kept in mind, in so much that they may have put before them so many choices, but it's really important that they make the ultimate choice because they come from, okay, that's what I wanted to know.
No, absolutely. We definitely understand and respect and honor survivor-centered approaches. We're never going to be in their shoes, and we need to acknowledge that. So that's the approach that we honor here at YWCA Glendale and Pasadena.
And then to Ariana, I liked when you spoke about these particular roles. And when I was earning my women's studies degree, there was a course, and this is back in maybe late 1970s and 80s, is the emerging norms. We talked about who's responsible, who's going to do this, who's going to do that, how do you split up the time? And so we're talking about equity and androgyny for that matter. And I've prepared tools for the future in Armenian and in English that we can address those things. But the bottom line, when you live in a household and maintain it, usually is not who does the most in one category, washing dishes or doing clothes or something like that. The real essence of it is who is left with the ultimate responsibility, which is something that in the future we might have to discuss. Is that sound something of worth inquiring about in the future when we talk about these?
14:30.
Oh, sorry about my clock.
Yes, I mean, in regards to like the household and like the power and control type of thing, what we at YWCA Glendale and Pasadena, why we mention this and we mention things in the household is because we want our survivors to have the autonomy to make decisions on their own. And either if it's decisions on their own or decisions mutually. It can't be where one person is doing X, Y, Z, because if we see that it can make it where it could become more and more and more, where then it could become borderline abusive. So that's why at YWCA Glendale Pasadena, we give our survivors the autonomy to make their own decisions, like how Hasmeek said. We are survivor centered. We do have a trauma informed approach. So we've had survivors who go back with their abusers, and we might not agree with it, but it's ultimately their decision, and we understand. When recently we had a survivor withdraw the restraining order, I wasn't agreeing upon it, but she wanted to withdraw it. And then when I spoke with her and I let her and we spoke, I understood why. And it was because she has a child who's autistic, who she needs that extra support. And with the restraining order, she wasn't able to have it. And I understood that. And I go, okay, I understand. So what we did was we safety planned with her. We gave her all the tools necessary to be like, okay, you don't have this paper anymore to protect you, but let's give you the tools to protect yourself just in case if anything happens. And we're always here for anything. And that goes for everyone. Where I put our hotline number on the chat. We answer all phone calls 24/7, even during holidays. So we're here just to listen. We're here in a non-judgmental way to listen and see what we can do to help them.
Hasmeek, do you have any comments about dating violence and how you've sought interventions that might ameliorate that problem?
Yeah, definitely. Here at YWCA Glendale, Pasadena, we have work that we do in our communities to address dating abuse, especially at a young age. We go to our local communities and we teach what healthy dating relationships are and what are harmful dating relationships. I think that work is very important to do. Again, as I stressed, it's kind of very concerning that this knowledge isn't taught in classrooms, when I feel like should be like part of the mandatory knowledge that people get through K through 12 at least. But teaching people about what is toxic, what is gaslighting, what does it mean to have an equal relationship where you're able to communicate freely? What do you need in a relationship? Because often I feel like because of the lack of that knowledge in schools, we go into relationships thinking about, okay, you're not in the place where you're thinking about what are your needs are. You get that idea after maybe your first experience or your second experience. But without having that knowledge in the first place, you could be more vulnerable to harmful dating traits, right? Sorry, I'm gonna check the chat. There was a question.
It's a question about children.
Oh, what's being done for younger children? What support do they get with how to deal with violence at home or school? I'm especially curious how this is handled in Armenia or Artsakh or with Armenians living in the LA area. Cultural differences on how to work through violence. I can't speak for what is going on in the homeland, unfortunately. I could speak for what is going on locally here in Glendale. Again, as mentioned, we provide a middle school age curriculum to students. We have girls programs that we share this knowledge at, and we go to local schools here in Glendale Unified School District, and also we're starting to explore Pasadena Unified School District. But we're teaching that knowledge because unfortunately the school isn't. So what do we have to do? We have to take that responsibility as a community organization and show up for our communities by sharing this knowledge.
Thank you so much. And we're going to have time for more questions and comments. So remember to use the chat. And I think Hasmik and Ariana have underscored the importance of support, that whether it's a survivor, whether it's a man, I mean, there are many men who have come to the realization that violence is not a good solution and they need support to figure out a different way to operate in their lives. And so support is a common theme that's going to be coming up again and again. So we're going to move on now to Craig Norberg Boehm. He's a great resource for us. He's been in this field since the mid-1970s when he helped co-found Raven in St. Louis, Missouri. Raven stands for Rape and Violence End Now. And they had one of the very earliest men's centers in this country, also supported women, providing childcare when women had conferences. It was a great resource. He has since moved on to do other things in this field. He worked 15 years with Jane Doe Inc., which is our sexual assault and domestic violence coalition here in Massachusetts, where he founded and was the past director for about 15 years of something called the Massachusetts White Ribbon Day campaign. And that involved men at all levels in our community here to step up to the plate and do something about preventing violence. We have to stop this sort of image we all have that men are always part of the problem and never part of the solution. Well, they can and have been part of the solution, and that's what we're fostering here with these conversations. So Craig is going to prepare, he has prepared a few remarks, and then he's going to lead a conversation with our three fabulous speakers, Alex, Haig, and Mike. Thanks, Craig.
Well, thank you, Judy, and thank you, Ariana and Asmik, and thank you, Silva. It's a terrific opportunity to be able to speak with everyone and to share this conversation within the Armenian diaspora. I mean, it's a it's not an easy conversation to have. You know, when you think, especially when the majority of the conversation is about male as offender and female as survivor, is the most common conversation because it's the most common problem. Not the only. There are same-sex relationships where the male-male, female-female, where domestic violence occurs and sexual assault occurs. And there's female-to-male violence that occurs in relationships. We all know that. Just that there's much smaller numbers. You know, when I ask most centers, I'm not sure what the answer is in Glendale, that, we have, 1 in 100, 1 in 20. In turn, it would be a high number of folks coming through the door. And so that's sort of the reality for all sorts of reasons. But it's not an equal playing field by any means. And that's why we find ourselves talking about masculinity so much, is that what's going on there? Why does it have to be this way? And so this is what I'm going to talk a little bit about. I'm going to share my screen and say a few words, and then I'm going to enjoy a conversation with our panel about their lives and about how this fits and what some of this means to you. That's the idea here. And our hope over time is to build a project in the diaspora about a male conversation. Maybe it's a men's discussion project, maybe it's some other things. But there are some responsibilities that I think we can step up to. Let me share my screen here. with luck, this will work without too much trouble. And so this is a set of slides I used in our first presentation a few weeks back. I'm not going to give it in the same way or say this so completely, but I do want to emphasize that I do believe that men are part of the solution, and that we can promote in all kinds of ways solutions, and we can be proud of that. I am with the Men Engage Alliance, which is an international group, doing this kind of work all over the world, and I'm just happy to be in an era where I can say that. It wasn't true back in the 70s and 80s. It wasn't all over the world. The White Ribbon Campaign, which is the red square there, is something that started in Canada through a crime that occurred in Montreal some years back, that really galvanized the Canadian community of men. So not my name, not anymore. It's not going to happen anymore. It really was about that kind of spirit. But I do want to say a few words about my appreciations for the work. I mean, just what we hear from the Glendale folks about women are leading the way, the survivor's voice, female and male, about experience is what teaches us what's important and what the realities are. Hasmik and Ariana are wonderful advocates. Advocates are in every state of the United States. There's the Women's Resource Center in Armenia is exactly the same way, doing the same work, working with survivors day to day. So we're happy to say that there are interventions happening, that there are resources being built for survivors of all stripes, and that's what's necessary. And I just want to thank the men who are here now, the men on the panel, the men who are thinking about this. What is our role in the solution? I mean, the Me Too campaign, which many of you have heard about, just recently brought to the fore the importance of power in relationships, and that we need to be doing something for solutions. I'm going to say that the problem is widespread, and I think that the folks in Glendale have made it very clear how serious it is, that every day it's important. But it's as many as 1 in 2 women and 1 in 4 men in the world have experienced some form of sexual violence and domestic violence in their lifetime. These are difficult to imagine figures, but this is sort of what research tells us. So it's a common experience, and we need to recognize that. I want to move upstream in the conversation. That's why I use this river picture. Downstream are folks in the river drowning and need to be rescued. That's really what folks in Glendale are working on. Then we talk about prevention, which was Hasmik's for, is like, what do we do with folks who are in the water, and how do we get out of the water? What is this water like? So upstream, further and further, we figure out, why are these folks getting thrown into the water, and how can we maybe prevent that originally? Where does this before it starts? I don't really have a good answer to that, but I have a lot of thoughts. But I just want to say that this is where we're leading to, is what is upriver? What are we doing? What is this water? What are we thinking about? How are we as parents? How are we as friends? How are we as colleagues? How are we as teammates? I mean, this is sort of what we're talking about, the social matter of our lives. Men are involved in a lot of ways, and we just mentioned a few. Some are many, and some are offenders, some are victims. But I think the majority are, in some respects, bystanders. And so thinking ourselves as bystanders is a way to think of solutions that we all can be a part of. What's going on with our neighbors? What's going on with our workmates? What's going on with our friends? What's going on with our families? What's going on with our kids? How can we be resources when it's needed? You don't have to be in the middle of terror or the middle of trauma to know that you have participation in solutions. We can all be role models. So that's the kind of idea. Sort of briefly spoken, when we think about men, who's ready to make a difference? And this chart I use is sort of like, some really aren't. They're not ready. They're hostile and think we're doing things that aren't good. Some are uninterested. This is not my cup of tea. But there are many who I think are willing and ready if they just knew what to do and could have some activity. And they're active leaders. So I think what we're going to talk about today is kind of this range of willing and ready. What do we do with those folks? We could refer to some of the other categories, but I think those who are willing and ready, what are we able to do to motivate men who are ready to help? I think that's really the idea. There are some concrete examples I'll brief just and then conclude shortly, which is that you can train as bystanders. There's actually formal training off the shelf that helps us think about what to do when you see something you don't like, or you're noticing something you don't like. And there are instant reactions, instinctual reactions to get in the middle, or to kind of leave it alone. Those are instinctive reactions. There are probably 5 alternatives, and we may not know what those alternatives are at any one time. So it's just training. We can organize training. We can help dads be better fathers. We help dads be better fathers. Folks may not have learned. We can help with that dynamic in the household. And there's formal training. There's courses, and one called the Nurturing Fathers Program is a terrific one. And then there's marketing, public messaging that helps say what we want and puts it out there for people to kind of understand and kind of respond to. One of the campaigns is called Men Care, and it puts out men in nurturing roles, taking care of their parents, taking care of their communities, taking care of their kids, and taking care of each other. So this is a poster imaging and messaging campaign that's really literally advertising. And so there's a range of things to do. I just wanted to give you these examples, people learning to be bystanders in one way or the other, using sports teams as role models and platforms, working with dads and dads programs, having kids there, learning to do what you need to do to keep kids safe and to take care of them. And then of course, just role modeling. And these are examples of some of the posters. So this is the idea. And I think that there's a range of roles in the community, anywhere from what the churches might do, such as discussion groups and domestic violence awareness month service activities or whatnot. Hasmik beautifully describes some of these kind of challenges that happen in the more traditional, what we're now calling in some respects, informing toxic masculinity, in that there's a masculinity that is not toxic. One would hope that there's a way of being that's human, but there are all these things that the therapy programs for offenders address: entitlement, fatal peril, expectation of service, thingify, objectification. These are things that we have to talk about, which men's groups can all talk about, but there are strengths. There are strengths in our lives that are important to draw from. Boys are eager to claim their capacity for caring, for example. Masculinity is something we learn. This doesn't come innately, so we can learn alternatives. So these are strengths. And finally, culture matters. I just want to finish with this, saying that, what in Armenia, in particular, what does Armenian culture bring as strengths culturally to solutions? You can draw from other cultures. For example, Native American cultures honor Mother Earth and nature. And so returning to roots is something that folks in that culture talk about in their programs. And but all of this is about connections and relationships and honoring mutual respect. I think that's sort of the main gist, but how do you make that something that is particularly about manliness and manhood? And so we want a manhood that embraces these kinds of values. So I just want to say thank you, and I'm happy to hear a few questions about this before we go on, if there are any. We are looking for leaders. We're looking for men in their roles as coaches and friends, as fathers, as partners, as colleagues. I think this is what we're aiming for, and a community dialogue along these lines. So I want to thank everyone, and I'm hoping that we can have this. And I'm going to turn off my slides in a moment, but if you do have questions for me, I'm happy to answer them. Any of the panelists have thoughts or questions? I'm going to wait a moment before I launch into anything. Judy, is there any comment you might want to make?
I wanted to thank you because I thought that was terrific, and it also reflects your more recent work with NAMN, North American Men Engage, and Merge for Equality. I noticed you showed a slide there, and I do want to mention that Merge for Equality has done trainings of childcare providers, people who are in early childhood education,
That's very
so
true.
that they can be thinking about these things in those group settings. And that's a really important place to start. And that's also a possible project to think about in the Armenian community, because we do have childcare programs that are serving Armenian families. I wanted to give the participants who are attending some time to write their questions and comments in the chat. So maybe what we could move on to now is responses from Haig, Alex, and Mike. And then we could keep our eye on the chat. There was one question from Judith that I'm hoping that you all took a look at. And one of you may want to take that on, because I thought it was a good one, Judith Strang-Waldo. So I don't know who would like to go first, but
Sure.
Alex, you're off mute. Does that mean you're ready?
Oh, sure.
Launching people into these things, yeah.
No, it's fine. Do you have Judith's question? Is it in the chat here?
Mm-hmm.
Judy, do you want us to answer that question? Is that your thought?
Yeah, I think that might be a good idea. It's a thought that you might have to address, Craig. How do you work with women who grew up within an abusive situation and then marry into one? If the mother hasn't left, how do you change the psychology of the daughter that it's okay to leave?
Well, you know, I'm not the best answerer. I think Hasman can help me with this, but it's really about the support systems that are established around them and what they see as role modeling and what some sense of what's right. You know, Hasman, do you have some comment on this?
Yeah, I think I want to concur with what Craig said. I think it's really about the support system. It's unfortunately whenever there's trauma of being in the home and seeing possibly your mother going through violence, it's hard to learn what is a healthy way of loving if you haven't really seen that within the home or your other spaces. But it's about being there for that person, of course. I don't know if it's correct to say to change their psychology, but it's to say to be there for them and to be like, hey, I'm sort of concerned with what you are experiencing. Of course, sharing that on their terms too, because it's very important to approach someone with your concerns in a mindful way. But being there for them and saying, I feel for you, I see what you're going through, it's sort of concerning, can we talk about it? And it's a process, it's a journey, but that's because you're addressing the trauma, and unfortunately getting rid of trauma isn't easy like this, but it's being there for the person, being their support, being their community whenever they need it to be. And again, it's always on their own terms, because we're not the ones in their shoes, we don't control their lives, we'll never be in the home that they live in or are part of. And keeping that in our approach is very, very imperative. Sure.
Thank you, Asbik. That's right. A piece of advice that I often hear is to arm yourself with information. And so there are local resources in almost every area. And so if you don't know your local resource, one can check with the state coalitions. There are sexual assault and domestic violence coalitions in each state, and they have a list of local resources. And you would discover, if you were not in Pasadena and discovered the YW Glendale, you will find someone similar in most localities around the US in particular, and I think in Canada as well, and other resources in Armenia of similarity, that there's a place to have at least a conversation, if there's a conversation.
I also think Judith's point about what we learn in our families is very important. And for some women I know who grew up in those situations and they married someone who turned out to be violent as well, the first step in ending that was finding someone. It sometimes was a support group. Sometimes it was just another woman who left an abusive relationship, who became a really important support person to that woman, who then ultimately was able to leave her situation, but not without this constant support from someone who had lived through it, who understood what she was going through, how hard it was to leave, and making sure that all those elements of a support system are in place are essential if a woman is even going to entertain this, because it isn't something she's learned in her family, but she can learn it from other women, from other families where they've dealt with violence and they've been able to stop the cycle in some way or in another.
Thanks, Judy. So let's segue to our panel discussion. I'm going to introduce these wonderful folks, and then we're going to answer a few questions and see where we go with this. And I think it'll be a great conversation. I'm looking forward to it. We have three folks. Hi, Nasian, help me with your pronunciations if I get them wrong. Alex Karapetian, welcome. And Mike Church. Thank you, all three of you, for coming. I'll say a word about each of you. Then we'll ask a question. We'll see where we go with that. Then I'll ask another question, see where we go with that, and so forth. So I'm gonna introduce you according to what's happened to be on my paper. Nothing. It's completely random. So, Hike, your bio first sentence says that you are a GIS specialist for CityNet, a nonprofit focused on reducing homelessness in Southern California. You spent a couple of years as case manager for another nonprofit. We've helped house families experiencing homelessness. You're a lifelong social justice activist. Okay. And Alex, you've received an MS in integrated marketing from New York University, graduated from Lafayette College, and you have a BA in government and law, and currently in business. And in a company that president of a Copion Technical Company, a family run and operated electronic power supply manufacturer in Pennsylvania and Florida. And you're involved in many community activities, including, among many others, Armenian Assembly of American Board member, Copion Center for the Environment, AUA. That's the AUA in Armenia?
Yes.
Yeah, that's great. And so you're very involved in community work and business. I think it's terrific. And then Mike, it's a pleasure to meet you in face-to-face. That you joined the Army right out of graduating from high school. So that was a long journey and a career for you.
Yes.
And that watching the Twin Towers fall during your senior year was such a motivator in your life to join the military. You served 18 years, during which time you received multiple awards, including an Army Commendation Medal with V for Valor in direct combat, a Purple Heart for your actions during a firefight in Afghanistan, suffering multiple injuries, where you're medically separated. It's a journey, and now you've moved to an interest in social work, and you're an MSW student at Bridgewater State University here in Massachusetts, in our neck of the woods, my neck of the woods, which I think is terrific. And that you'll complete your coursework in a couple of years. So I want to welcome all three of you to this conversation. You bring very different perspectives, and I'm looking forward to hearing some of your comments. So just to help us get started, let me ask this question generally. What do you feel the roles might be, or the role is for either yourself or men in general for solutions to what we're talking about today, relationship violence or sexual assault? I'll start with Alex. What comes to your mind?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is, we need to break this cycle, and it starts in the home. The old saying, monkey see, monkey do.
Yeah.
I have 3 young boys, and ages 7.5, 5.5, and 2.5. And another saying, it takes a village. Well, it took a village of strong Armenian women to raise me, in my past and in my present, from my mother, aunt, mother-in-law, and my wife. These are 4 very important, very strong, independent women who really created this home and environment that their children could emulate and could see, how to be a good man, how to treat other women. And it really started from the home. And I think for my children in particular, they see how I treat their mother. And number one thing is the respect that they deserve. It's having respect for the woman in the home. At a minimum, it is of equal to the man's role, at a minimum, because, I'm going to use my own personal example. My wife and I both work, and she has a very demanding job. And the traditional roles of, she takes care of the kids and she does all those things and I go out to work. Well, that's not the case for us, because she has a very demanding job, which I try to support in any way I can, which means I have to leave work early sometimes to go pick up the kids, or I have to do certain things that, quote unquote, aren't a man's role. And that mentality needs to change. And that's what I mean by breaking that cycle. It's over time, it will change, but it starts in the home. And when my kids see that, when they see, how much their mother does and how I treat her and how their grandparents are and their uncles, their aunts, it's from the family, and it's really from the home. And that's how we're going to break this cycle. And it starts from the home, period. And if everyone could be doing this, we wouldn't be having this issue. I truly believe that.
Yeah. So this is something to focus on. Heike, what do you think? You agree with Alex, or you have additional thoughts?
Oh, very much. I think a lot of the things we'll be talking about today will touch on this. What are the root causes? And it does start in the home. It's what children see when they're growing up. I did want to say it's an honor to be here, and I'm very proud to be part of this conversation. So thank you, everybody. And so a lot of the things I might mention might be things that we talk about or what Hasbik mentioned earlier as well. But I do also want to maybe focus on things that maybe are more something unique that I might be able to offer. And it's like small things like that we might all know already, that maybe normalizing therapy in general for everybody, but especially for men, would be a great resource in helping end that cycle, helping maybe the father, the children, understand their situations better, improve. Everything from just also being better at listening. Armenians are not very good at listening in general. We have a very hard time with that. We like to talk, and everyone has their opinion about something, but we do not listen. But working in homelessness, throughout these last few years, I always go to what are the root causes? How does this all start? How did this happen in the first place? So I'll be doing the same I do the same thing with, domestic violence and abuse. I try to think about what are these root causes, and it is connected to those early experiences that people experience at the home. But one thing that I've been thinking a lot about recently is, and I think about, I think after I went to Armenia and I, saw sort of the negative not traditions, but the culture there in terms of how women are treated, the toxic masculinity. And I really believe that a lot of this negative behavior, this abuse, can stem from a sort of sense of defeat that many men and humans, people in general, will experience in life. Defeat in their profession, in their finances, defeat in their status or prestige, this or that. That this sense of defeat will then will create these frustrations and negative emotions that then are redirected to the environment in which they hold power in, which is in the home oftentimes, the family that they're around, the people that they control or have power over. This can happen even at a young age when a kid is in an abusive family or home or environment, and they have no power in that situation. But where do they have power? Well, maybe they have power at the schoolyard or online and on social media, and they'll redirect this frustration and abuse towards others that they have power over. So I think thinking about and maybe what a solution here can be for Armenians and people in general is, redefining what success is in life, and maybe understanding why you feel defeated. For example, in Armenia, where there's so much economic hardship, a lot of men can feel defeated, emasculated, but then explaining like, look, the Soviet Union collapsing and the economy collapsing, it's not your fault. It's not you. It's not your fault that this happened. This doesn't say anything about you personally. Then we can redefine success and say, hey, it's not economic, it's not status, it's it's your the love and respect you have for people, the friendships you make, the community work, the virtues that you hold can maybe what can be the definition of what a successful life and person can be. So I think that can help with the psychology and minimize negative behavior. So that could be one thing.
No, it's just these are challenging things when you're up against tradition, and the values of tradition. And with that, I'm going to move over to Mike and see what kind of thoughts you have that are the same or different than the others. I know your journey has been unique in the room.
I completely agree with what they both said. What Alex said definitely kind of resonated with me in the fatherhood thing, as I have a 14-year-old son who's been going through a very similar situation at school, just getting into girls, and all his friends are dating girls and different relationships and that. So helping him navigate that in kind of a respectful manner has been a trip. But I definitely think that men being involved in the change away from toxic masculinity is huge. I feel like if it's a battle that men are not willing to stand up and become a part of, it can't happen, because you have that toxic masculinity kind of beaten into you throughout your life and growing up, and you're not going to listen to anyone about changing that, and you make excuses for what's going on until maybe a friend of yours or another male that you look up to says, whoa, hold on, like that's not okay, like let's talk about this. And kind of meeting men where they're at the time.
Yeah.
My focus in social work is on substance use, and that's a huge part of the harm reduction model, is meeting the client where they're at. And if you are dealing with men who have those traits and they're not willing to educate themselves or look past them, it's going to be kind of hard to try and force them to do so. So being able to sit and kind of meet them where they're at in that time frame and model, then you can slowly try and educate them out of it, and it'll have much more effect than trying to jam it down someone's throat.
No, it's true. I mean, all of you talked about traditions and shifting traditions. How do you shift these norms? You know, the idea of Alex, you mentioned, well, the traditional role of man is of the man of the house is man of the house, quote unquote, is not to do the dishes or not to take care of the kids, but to go out and work. You know, and that's similar to you, Heidi. You mentioned something about being, you know, therapy is not traditional. You know, it's something that the saying, I need something, you know, I need some help, saying I need help. You know, in the trivial way, it's like, I'm not going to ask the directions because that's somehow something that's a failure in itself. So it's those kinds of things that we set up a kind of a front, you know, that is, I am this way. And how can I, and that's what you're talking about, Mike, because I'm not going to put that down. It's been trained into me. This is who I am. I can't just set it down. It's who I am. And so Mike, you mentioned a solution I want to hear a little bit more about. Is like somebody saying, hey, wait a minute, this is something we need to shift from. Have any of you noticed that in any of your friends, that they're ready to do that? That they've actually said that? Has that occurred to any of you? You're saying
not those exact words, but I've definitely seen improvement in a lot of my friends, especially those military members who are not out anymore and live close by.
Yeah.
My best friend is from the military, and he lives about 30 minutes from me, so we see him all the time. And I've definitely seen a shift in his personality as well as mine since leaving the military. So yeah, there is
the military kind of
been...
wants a stronger man perspective. You have to face, you know, something hellacious. You have to face something. Yeah.
And there's ways to do that without that toxic masculinity traits being shoved down our throats too. There's plenty of other cultures that don't really adopt that sort of mentality that handle it just fine.
That's right.
There are other ways to train men in the military rather than the chest pounding typical infantrymen as people think of. Right.
You can do alternatives. Hey.
I'm seeing, so I'm definitely feeling from my friend groups or people I come across, I mean, people are aware, they know it's wrong. Like they know things shouldn't be this way, or this tradition is outdated and things should change. But most men my age or in general will still be, indifferent most of the time. They won't take action about it. They know better, but they won't do something about it. And that could be because of societal norms. So I think Mike or someone was mentioning how we do need to be more active in calling out people around us when we see something negative like that. So I would, I think, we get so frustrated when we see no one do anything about Artsakh, right? Why no one cares about this and people are dying because of it, right? So it's the same thing with domestic abuse. We're just as responsible for all these ills in society when we're the bystanders and we're being indifferent. I think if we can start to understand better that something that happens in someone's home isn't isolated and in a vacuum, it affects all of us in the community, and whether it's even like leading to people to become homeless, because what I've experienced is a lot of their early life trauma or this sort of abuse is a big reason for why they've ended on this homelessness path. So and that affects the community in the end. So I think if we understand that it is all our responsibility to be taking care of each other, even if it's not something happening within your own home, it's happening in someone else's home. So we cannot be silent like that.
Yeah, taking each other is a good comment. Alex, do you have anything to add to that? These thoughts, like what have you seen around in your life?
Yeah, I have seen improvements actually. So half my life I lived in LA because I'm originally from Los Angeles, and then my immediate family moved to the East Coast to Pennsylvania. So I'm split in two. but I have a very, very close group of friends still in California that I keep in touch with. And it's interesting. It's some of the improvements I've seen have been from some of my friends from actually California who have left California, gone to the East Coast or went away to school in different parts, and their thought process has changed. Their decision-making has changed. Their personality has changed, for the better. And it's that change of scenery. It's, breaking that cycle. It's getting out of what they're used to, their environment, to see a different size and really just evolving. And it sounds so basic that we're having a conversation about this, if this is right and this is wrong and you shouldn't act like this, but that's really what it is. It's like you're evolving, but you have to get out of that environment in order to have any kind of positive change. So I have seen that, and some are subtle and some are pretty extreme and for the better. So I have.
I very much agree with that, Alex. Like getting out of the bubble. For me, it was huge to go to school on the East Coast and get out of California for a few years. I felt that was an education in itself, so I like
because you're surrounded by so many people who have different experiences, different backgrounds, and I'm generalizing here, but I'm assuming it's correct, is because I'm from California. That's all you knew. When I moved to Pennsylvania, I didn't have any non-Armenian friends. So that was a first for me because I went to Armenian school growing up from preschool until I left. So just having that different experience when you leave really impacts you. And it gives you a different perspective and for the better. So
I think once you can accept that people do life differently, then you start becoming way more tolerant of everybody who does something differently. Right. If you're only from the same village your whole life, and you see someone who's different from you for the first time, you might be, kind of bigoted and discriminatory or not understanding, So I like that for sure.
Sure. We could go on and on. I was going to ask about, how do you feel, what strengths Armenia brings to this? But I think maybe an audience question might bring that out. Judy, do you have something you want to raise?
Sure. One of the things that Anahid mentioned, I thought is worth spending a little time on. She specifically asked about how we might develop programs with youth groups like ACYOA or AYF, or even Sunday schools to begin this conversation around domestic violence. And also, as in the last session, we point the finger at the patriarchal structure of the church and some of the historically problematic comments of priests. And we're not going to get into that now because we've seen improvement. And I think the clergy is making progress here. I remember the late Father Daja Davidian's early work with some of the younger men in the clergy and how important he was in role modeling another sort of attitude. The macho patriarchal way in which the church is organized hasn't really helped this conversation. So we need what I would say more enlightened men in the clergy stepping up to the plate and joining us, as we hope maybe in our third session, to create a different kind of conversation in those spaces that are so important to our community. This is a community that is not only dealing with the legacy of the genocide, it's also dealing with the war in Artsakh, and it's dealing with all kinds of traumas that aren't always spoken about in any given moment, but they play a role. And how do we take that into account, but also begin this hard work, as every one of you has said, beginning in the home, beginning with young boys and young girls as well, role modeling something different. So maybe we could begin with that question about how can we reach out to youth groups and start something a little different? Yeah,
of course. I mean, as parents, I think in the panel that we were talking with today, we can think of along those lines, friends and youth, that there's, I think there's a lot of that can be done. I want to ask the panelists about if you can think about Armenia as a culture, what strengths do you feel they bring to bear to this particular puzzle? What comes to mind? I knew Manuk has answers to that question.
The strengths of the Armenians?
Yeah.
I can see something.
Sure.
Manuk, unless you're going to see something.
Sure.
Okay.
Go ahead, Ike.
Well, I do want to say that I have been involved in Armenian organizations my entire life, AYF and ACYOA, and And even as Judith was mentioning, the clergy structure, the church structure is very patriarchal. We do see that in all our organizations as well. I do pride, like AYF, in camaraderie between our men and women, and our this Engerutun, this equality of camaraderie. But we still see, as the hierarchy goes up and up, less women involved, right? So we do. So actually, me and Hasmi worked on a human rights council, which is one of the councils of the AYF, and we focused on a lot of, we did events on domestic violence in Armenia and brought awareness to our community. We do work like this. It's definitely, there's a lot more to be done, but there are avenues that we have been trying to incorporate, but there's a lot of things probably we could say about Armenian strengths and how we can use it. But one thing I was specifically thinking about that might be different than the rest of something more unique is I think Armenians as a strength love history. And I love history a lot, but I think Armenians love studying history. We love our history. There's so much to talk about, and so much, every time we meet someone, we love to tell them everything about Armenian history, right? So, and oftentimes men who are not so receptive to these kind of conversations, or will block it out the second they hear some sort of, let's say, a human rights jargon. They're like, oh, I don't want to listen to this. We can potentially use history as a communication tool and a mechanism for making our Armenian men, or Armenians in general, understand why this tradition is like this, or why this thing is like this, right? So I can give an example. So there's an Armenian sign language made by Armenian women in the villages called Harsneren. It was a Armenian sign language spoken between Armenian newlyweds. And it was because there's a practice in Armenia. It's not very common today. It's very rare, but last few hundred years, there was a thing called Chokhoskanu, which was silence keeping. Armenian newlyweds weren't allowed to speak for years and years and years. And if you look at old photos of Armenian women, their mouths are covered, so it was a thing. And you'll still see a few places here and there. I was very lucky enough to go with my friend who was a researcher who was researching this subject. And we got to also discuss this topic on the AYF's podcast that I host. So you could type in Harstaden, by the way, you guys, and you could learn more about this. But what I'm getting at is, where did this Chokhoskanu come from, this silence keeping? And I was reading Rafi's Khent. It's a book from the 1870s about Armenian life in the villages and the struggle back then. And one of the characters is a daughter who they keep show as a son, like they as a way to protect this daughter. They pretend like this daughter is actually a son, to keep away from the local warlords who might kidnap or abduct this young woman, or abuse, or this and that. And so I realized that, okay, maybe a lot of this control over women, keeping them in the house, not letting them speak to others, was a defense mechanism that kind of occurred over the years through Armenian history, because there was so much danger around. And there's still so much danger around. It's dangerous to walk around alone at night as a woman. It's still a dangerous world out there. So I started to see, okay, maybe this was the root cause of something, this traditional this phenomena that we have in our society. However, by studying this, this event in history and understanding this tradition, we could say, look, this is why this isn't relevant anymore today, or this is why this doesn't work as this practice doesn't work the same way today, or isn't right, because we know this and this and that now. So we can maybe make men or Armenians understand, why this tradition is wrong, or this action is incorrect.
I think it's through
a mechanism of history, communication, and
sounds great,
speaking that way. So
Alex, I see you nodding.
yeah, because I completely agree with Haig, and that was a really good example. Just another thing, you said history, and immediately I thought pride. We are such a prideful people. Just in my town, which is Summit, New Jersey, we were just driving and saw an Armenian flag. I mean, we literally drove down the street, stopped. What's the address? Who are they? Are you Armenian? I'm Armenian. This camaraderie, we have a kinship and we have a bond amongst one another. And men or women, it doesn't matter, we're all Armenian. Whether you're Ramgavar or Dashnak, it doesn't matter, we're Armenian. So because we're such a prideful people, empowering women is, I think, one way to also help solve this issue. And it's not just women empowering women, but men empowering women, possibly, in leadership positions, whether it's business or politics. In Armenia, almost 60% of women have advanced degrees. They should be, at these new startup tech companies that are happening in Armenia right now. They should be, professors. They should be pushed and motivated and encouraged to run for office. Here in the States, we only have a handful. Anna Eshoo, for example, Congresswoman, which is great, but I think there needs to be more. And as a people, we're such a prideful people. We want Armenians to do well. We want them to succeed. So I think making a conscientious effort to help motivate Armenian women and empower them from, as a man, I think that could help. Again, I hate to keep saying break the cycle, but that's really what we're doing, right? It's generational.
Down to it, yeah.
And it will make a lasting difference, and it will keep weaning and weaning this old mentality until it doesn't exist.
Yeah, I think you were talking about a long-term solution. There's long-term solutions here. And
yeah, this is not an overnight solution.
Yeah.
This is a long-term, and we've already come such a long way over the past, let's say, 50 years. Look where we were and look where we are now. It's just going to continue to evolve and get better. But I think putting these practices in place as being common is a key.
Yeah.
So here's a question. I want to ask about the role of men's groups in the churches. I know very few men's groups in Armenian churches who've taken up this topic, and maybe one of the three of you are aware of it.
I'm not very involved in my local.
I think we'll get to that. I think this would be a good conversation to get to.
But it should happen.
Yeah.
Okay.
I want to share on the men's group. It's very much of a slippery slope. There is a men's club in churches.
Yeah.
But sometimes when men, and I don't, first of all, I want to, it's not my line, but I wouldn't want to join a club that would have me as a member. But I see sometimes when men are on their own devices, even in a setting of being out someplace, and they can slip down to that 16-year-old. I also want to thank Haig and Alec and Mike. And Alec, when you mentioned Chent, for those of us that don't speak Armenian, the book means the fool.
Mhm.
Alec, you were just wonderful, because you picked up on what Craig laid out in the beginning, this is not innate. You just beautifully talked about the environments, of which Mike talked about the environments that we're immersed in, and the differences between California and Pennsylvania. And I was reading Catherine Wall's, and I remember what Judith said, and Catherine, you mentioned about the genocide and the impact of the genocide. And let me just put it to very plainly. The genocide made us at one time the oppressed. And from a psychological dynamic, when you're oppressed, you do have a choice. And you have a choice to identify with other people that have been oppressed, or you can become the oppressor. And right now I understand that Armenians are taking Ukrainians in. And Ukrainians were not helpful during the war we had with the Azeris. But how big of a heart Armenia must have to take them in, because that identified with the oppressed now just overrules.
That's right.
The nature and the nurture, going to the question that was posted by Catherine Wall, is a big part of why, besides that event in our lives, that the church is fundamentally at a loss. It's very well understood that the greatest period of time for Armenian women was in the late 1890s to 1937. And I always, and kind of characteristically says, well, how do these women succeed so much? I think it was a time that men just stayed out of their way. But the signs of us changing was when we came under the yoke, and I want to mention the Soviet Union, which became the predominant fixture in men growing up. And I'm going to get right swiftly back to Judith about men, women marrying the same kind of man the mother married. But when we go through, again, LA, Philadelphia, and you even mentioned New England and Armenia, all those are affected. Now imagine priests that grew up in the Middle East or even in the Soviet Union. How far have they pulled away from Krimyan Haidi, who was the first leader of the entire Armenian church that institutionalized coeducation? Nowhere in the world that happened. That happened in Armenia. So we lost a connection with our own roots. And, with the whole thing about Armenian women having the right to vote. And I know about you're talking about being elected and so on, and to perceive those things. Going to the, one of the things that I learned while we're working on Armenia is, and I had when I worked at the Women's Center, I did bring the fathers. I had a fatherhood.
30 more seconds, Manu.
Okay, I quickly wanted to say that graduate students from Brown that went back home to Armenia told me, Mom says, there's a lot of men interested in you, but I want you to do one thing. I want to check out their mothers before you choose. Because if the mother, the husband of the woman getting married came from a mother who had an abusive relationship, that the son was the only man in her life that truly had unconditional love for her. It wasn't her spouse. And she's invested a lot into that son, and to let that son go to another woman can be a little conflicting. As a matter of fact, this is not just an anecdotal story, because we cannot make any conclusions on that, but I've seen it in a number of cases. But when you go to the market, they actually have some kind of weird serpent and snake, because it's supposed to represent the mother-in-law. Again, these are the impacts of the environments on our once was a little bit of an Armenian soul, and that through you guys, I'm seeing it come back out, that any conflicts in you is that inner core, that innate, again, part of our beings is trying to break its waist loose. Thank you, Craig.
Thank you so much, Manu. So we have about 5 minutes, I think, in our whole program. Mike, I know you haven't gotten to jump back in again. If you got some thoughts of any of this you'd like to share that you're thinking about in terms of this work, it doesn't have to be about Armenia. It can be just about the roles of men. I'd love to hear from you.
No, I'm just kind of taking it in, Greg. I'm really enjoying the conversation going on. Like I said, I wasn't incredibly prepared on my own fault for this.
Of course.
But I'm definitely appreciating the conversation going on. I agree with 99.9% of it.
Okay.
It's good.
Thank you. Final words, other final words, Alex or Heike? How about Alex, how about you? Any final words?
No, I just want to say, I think the work that you're all doing is incredible. So, thank you for allowing me to participate, shed a little bit of light on my own story and, the women in my life and how they've influenced me and my 3 children. And, it's just that will influence them to be the kind of men that we want them to be, and respect women and just be great citizens, be good Armenians.
Thank you. How do you put that up? Hi.
I guess the one thing I'll say is I think Armenian culture has a very big community aspect to it, and I think encouraging a more a communal society lifestyle will help everybody, whether it's an Armenian society or an American society, because like we were talking in the beginning about one of the questions about what do you do when you grew up with an abusive relationship and then you get into one, and then what does the daughter do? I think if we had more access to other members of our community, more people, and we're more around others and involved in other groups, we'd have more opportunities to see how things are different or make more friends and have more of those resources. So I think encouraging people to get involved and be more of a community person would benefit all of us. In the
Great.
end.
So finding a way to make this a community conversation.
Mhm.
That's great. Judy, I'll pass it back to you. And
Sure.
final
I
word?
just want to say thank you again, Alex, Haig, Mike, and Manu, Craig, and I are so appreciative of not just your participation, but also Razmik Sarkisian and Aram Gavour, who participated in the first of these 3 sessions. All of you are going to be brought into some sort of conversation about what might we do. We have these 3 models that Craig described briefly. We will have a follow-up conversation after the 3rd session, which is going to focus a little bit more on the church's potential role and think about some of these concrete things we might do. And it is going to take a committed group of men. You are some of the men who stepped up to the plate. Craig and I and others are willing to be of support. And there is a group of lawyers who've been working around domestic violence, both in Armenia and in the US, who will also provide support as needed. I think ultimately we might even get a little bit of funding. AWA is very committed to working on this issue. So this could be the home for a project that Armenian men will develop. It will take a little time, and these conversations are the beginning. But I have to thank you so much, because everything you're saying, everything that Razmik said, that Aram said in the first session, and what I think we'll hear in the 3rd session, will paint a picture of what is possible and what we might be able to do. And we do have community organizations that maybe haven't taken on this issue, but will be willing to. So with that, I'm going to thank you all and pass it back to Silva, the president of AWA, who's done such an amazing job of coordinating so many of our programs. You want to say goodbye to everyone, Silva?
Yes, I'd like to take just the last 2 minutes of this. And honestly, thank you all for, excuse me, frog in my throat. I've been listening so intently for this session. But I want to give my own little take on this too, that violence in any part of a society affects us all, from the scars that we bear onto the next generation and to the weakening of our social fabric. We've heard every step of the way in today's session that we need a cultural shift. And it starts at home, it starts in the classroom, in the playground, it starts in our places of worship, our churches, in our businesses, in all our relationships. It starts with leadership as role models. And while we women are usually the first to find problems and proactively seek solutions, it is ingrained in the men to find the solutions and protect human life and be the role models with dignity. With the right policies and programs, we can bring results. It means long-term comprehensive strategies that tackle the root causes of these violences, that protect the rights of women and girls, and promote strong and autonomous women's rights. And I do know that for the past 1.5 years or so, the Armenian Bar Association is also working to bring about these positive changes toward these issues, working with the Ministry of Labor and Social Services and with family law practitioners, and then trying to take all that they've gained from here back to Armenia. The campaign to end violence against women calls on a cross-section of society. It calls on you, it calls on me to actively seek the challenges and to change the culture of violence into one of respect and equality for all genders. It'll take you, it'll take me, it'll take us women and men to say, this matters for all of us. It is our human right. So with that, I want to personally thank our guests, Haig, Alex, and Chris, and Mike. Is it Mike? Sorry. And Mike for your participation in today's session. Thank you to Hasmig and Ariana and the YWCA for joining and contributing in this effort with Manu, Judy, and Craig. Thank you all. We look forward to presenting part 3 of this very important discussion on May 7th. last but not least, thank you to all the attendees who stayed with us through all this and across the globe. I know that we have them from Canada and all throughout at this point, the United States. So we really appreciate your presence, especially on a Saturday at these different time zones. So please look out for our future events. AWA is always interested in the issues of women and encourage you to become part of this group. If you're not yet a member, please join us. You can go onto our website, awainternational.org, and join the global network of women who share these values. And then, of course, our goals are always to engage communities. It is to enable connections, enhance well-being, and elevate leaders and empower learning. So until next time, please stay well, stay safe, stay informed, and stay relevant. Thank you all for attending.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.